Actually, the first quote is the opening lines of the Dhammapada, one of the great early writings of purportedly the words of the Buddha. All that we are is a result of what we have thought. It is founded on our thoughts. Well, as you can read as well as I can, I guess.
No, I don't think anyone from here on back can read a word of that.
Oh, really? Oh, my. Oh, my goodness. Okay. Yeah, I wonder.
Can you read it?
Yeah, I think if I was way back there, I wouldn't be able to read it either, so glad you mentioned that. Is that?
Is it better?
Here's our AV tech. Maybe he can help us here.
Unfortunately, there's not too much we can do.
Yeah. Okay, well, that means you better come up a little closer even, eh? So anyway, all that we are is a result of what we have thought. It is founded on our thoughts. It is made up of our thoughts. If a man speaks or acts with an evil thought, pain follows him as the wheel follows the foot of the ox that draws the wagon. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. It is founded on our thoughts. It is made up of our thoughts. If a man speaks or acts with a pure thought, happiness follows him like a shadow that never leaves him. And the second, as I say, that's from the Dhammapada. The second is when people are seriously ill, they go to consult a good doctor. They follow the doctor's advice, take whatever medicine he prescribes, and do all they can to overcome the disease and get well. In the same way, you should cure yourself of the diseases of karma, negative emotions, and suffering by following the prescriptions of that experienced doctor, the authentic teacher, and by taking the medicine of the Dharma. It's from the words of my perfect teacher, one of the classic writings in Tibetan Buddhism. And so here we go with, well, let's see here. Oops, my goodness. Help. At any rate,
Just use the wall.
oh, the wall, yeah, maybe.
Give that a try.
Yeah. Might help. At any rate, what I'm saying here is that we're really living at a unique junction in perhaps world history. I've perhaps reached far into overstatement by saying that not since the Sumerians began systematically mapping the heavens in the interests of harmonizing life as lived on Earth has there been such a confluence of, happy confluence of science and spirituality as seems to be occurring today. And I'm going to connect it up with Buddhist practice. Now, I'm going to approach Buddhist practice. With Buddhism, it really just depends on how you want to take it. Do you want to take it, practice it as a religion? Then it becomes a religion for you. If you want to explore it as a philosophy, then it's a philosophy. If you want to explore it as a therapy, as I'm doing in this presentation, then it becomes a therapy. And it's a therapy because the Buddha set out with one goal in mind, not to establish another religion, not to promulgate a new philosophy, but to determine the answer to the problem of suffering, which he saw as universal, and that forms the first noble truth of Buddhism. Oh, I can imagine that's pretty hard to read. And so the Buddha set out to, the story is is fairly well known by now that Siddhartha grew up amidst pomp and privilege as a prince of the Sakya tribe, and his father had apparently heard an oracle saying, or an oracle from a monk, telling him that his son would either be a great world conqueror or else he would be a monk. And so the father wanted him to follow in his footsteps. So he did everything he could to shield him from the suffering of the world and anything that would lead him along the path of being dissatisfied and deciding to live his life as a monk. But eventually, living this life of pleasure and privilege, Siddhartha became discontented and prevailed upon one of his servants to take him out into the world, where on one day he saw a person who was clearly desperately ill, and he had never seen such a thing, and so he wondered what that was, and his servant said, "That is illness, sire. It comes to all people." So that was very troubling to Siddhartha, and he returned to the grounds of the castle. They went out another day, and they saw a very, very old person who was bent over and decrepit looking, and said, "What is this?" "Well, this is old age, sire. It comes to all people." So once again, troubled, he went back to the castle, went out a third day, and saw a dead body lying by the side of the road. Was very troubled and asked what on earth that was. "That is death, sire. That comes to all people." And then on the fourth day, he saw a monk with a begging bowl who looked quite contented and happy amidst his poverty, and was told that is a mendicant, sire, a man who is looking for the answer to the problem of suffering. So Siddhartha decided that was the path he wanted to follow, and so that night, the story has it that he left the castle, the grounds of his father's palatial estate, and went out into the world in search of an answer to the problem of suffering. At first, he went through all the austerities that were common in the religious practices of his day, and outdid everyone in the extremes of his austerities. But it gained him a huge reputation, but didn't really take him any closer to understanding the problem of suffering. One day, a maiden, seeing his emaciated state, gave him some refreshment, and lo and behold, if he didn't feel a whole lot better. So I don't know if going with these is going to be any more enlightening, but let's do them anyway. Oops. Does that make a difference or not? There we go. Okay. So he took some refreshment, somewhat against his better judgment, but found he could think more clearly, and he was much more aware. And so he decided that the way of deprivation, the way of asceticism, was not the way to find out the answer, experience the answer to the suffering of life. And This upset his followers, who admired him for his ascetic rigor. So he went about his new way and resolved one famous day, sitting under a tree that became known as the Bodhi tree, the tree of enlightenment, that he would not rise until he had experienced for himself the answer to the problem of suffering. And so the stories go on they vary. They have this legendary quality. Some say all one night, some say 40 days and 40 nights. At any rate, he sat and he meditated, and he came upon the answer to the problem of the universality of suffering. And so his answers were encompassed in the fourfold, the Four Noble Truths, I should say. And the first of these was that suffering indeed is universal. Now, the Buddhist teachers somehow differ on this, and that's one of the beauties of Buddhism. There are 40,000 paths to enlightenment, and because it's so pragmatic, you follow the path that makes sense to you in your own experience. At any rate, the idea of the universality of suffering is not so much that referring to the inevitability of pain in life. Pain seems to be one of the givens of life, but the suffering referred to is the add-on, what we do with the pain, that we ruminate on it, that we resent on it, we brood on it, we struggle with it, we try to escape it, and that is what generates the suffering. So there's a differentiation. Pain is often referred to as the suffering of suffering, or the suffering of the pain, but the suffering that the Buddha talks about could just as well be described as the turmoil of life, that life perennially has a hunger, a dissatisfaction, and it makes us restless in search of the answer to that, or to the escape from that, to seek some kind of contentment. So the second noble truth then becomes that the source, what's the source of that suffering? And the source of the suffering is traditionally translated as desire, but much more as craving, much more that we set upon certain things that seem to give us momentary satisfaction, momentary contentment, and then finding this something that leads to momentary contentment, we must have it, and we latch onto it, and we hang on to it, and I don't want to let it go, but invariably it disappoints, invariably it fades. And this is where I wonder about some of the connections with the Buddhist idea of desire, better understood perhaps as craving, and addiction. And it seems to me that addiction is a particular case of craving, where it's my increasing understanding that I've been here in the last few days is that the particular craving that leads to addiction is itself a craving to escape the self, to escape that world of restlessness, and it's actually a kind of an effort to transcend the burdens of and the pain of discontent, of turmoil, of discontent with the self, and the illusory nature of the addiction is that it fades like all things fade, but it's so appealing in that it answers this kind of spiritual hunger So the addict goes after it again and again and again. Each time the fading happens, to get it again, and to try to control the whole business of finding a satisfaction to the problem of turmoil of life's dissatisfaction. So, as someone who doesn't work with addiction, how does that? Am I on the right track? Am I? Does that fit with the experience of those of you who do work with addiction? Yes.
Consultant says, I'm sure you know, it's people with spiritual hunger trying to quench that through spirits.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, one of the whole problems in the Buddha, which the word simply means the one who woke up. The Buddha was often asked, "Are you a god? Are you a prophet?" And he would simply say, "I am awake. I've awakened to what it's all about." And so part of the issue of the escape from suffering and the giving up of craving is the realization that not only are substances, not only are experiences going to disappoint and lead back to further dissatisfaction, but that the self itself is trying to maintain itself as in control of this whole project. Yet the self itself is constantly in movement, constantly changing, constantly striving. And so it strikes me that the experience of addiction is one where the addict gets caught in a catch-22 situation of trying to control a process that can't be controlled with a substance that will give control. And so the effort to control consistently fails and yet can't be let go of. So the Buddha said then, there is an answer to this, and that is to let go of craving, to let go of this yearning, restless desire. But the problem is that's easier said than done, that one can't just prescribe. The whole nature of desire is that it turns back on itself and becomes its own catch-22. How do you desire not to desire? How do you let go of hanging on? When hanging on is the problem, hanging on is the addiction. And so what the Buddha came up with was, I guess, the first 8-step program. His wasn't a 12-step program, it was an 8-step program. And the whole nature of the 8-step program is, oops, where are we here? Yeah. I seem to have got a page out of it. But at any rate, oh, here we are. It's right on here. The Eightfold Program, or the 8-step program of the Buddhas, is one not of more doing. This is the whole problem: is that the suffering is brought about by the effort to control, and the Buddha realized that using control to try to control, which is the problem that the addict has, I think, is just causes further suffering. So his program, his 8-step program, is a whole process of undoing, of unlearning, because his experience was we've already got it all. It's already right here. It's in our very nature. And so his 8-step program, the first one involves right view, or correct view. And the correct view is, first of all, to realize that you're caught in a trap, to really acknowledge and grasp in your own experience that you're messed up, that you're screwed up, that you're caught in a cycle of suffering and the attempt to escape suffering, which brings back more suffering. And to really grasp that you'll never get out of this alive. You'll never get out of this on your own. So the first step in the Buddha's 8-step program is right view. The second step is right thinking. And the whole notion of right thinking is that to turn in on oneself and pay attention to what's going on in your head, what you keep telling yourself, to tune in on your thinking, the words that keep driving you forward, that keep driving you in this restless quest to escape dissatisfaction, and yet always to keep coming back to being dissatisfied. So the second step in the program is right thinking. The third step, and in the right thinking, when one pays attention, one begins to see that the thoughts are only thoughts, that they just they come and they go. They come and they go. And the only thing that keeps them there and gives them any reality is when we hang on to them. That whole sort of hanging on, controlling thing and believing in the substantial reality of these. So the third practice in the 8-step program is right speech. So then in right speech, we pay attention, we tune in on the words we use, the language we use, how the language we use, the very words with which we express ourselves, try to understand ourselves, try to escape from this pattern, brings us back into it. So when we truly understand, when we truly experience the words we're using, and see how our language is perpetuating this cycle of suffering, escape, and being pulled back into it, then somehow we begin to realize that we don't need to be doing this, because as we pay attention, it all just comes and goes. So yes, you have your hand up. Yeah.
The one prior to right thinking.
Right view, right understanding. It's to understand the nature of the problem, to face up to the reality of the problem. The third, we talked about right speech. The fourth practice is right action, and by right action we mean, I think that's on the last one. Right action, we pay attention, very close attention to our actions, how we deal with other people, whether we deal in an exploitive way, a thoughtless way, a cruel way, whether we listen to others, pay attention to others, are kind to others, or thoughtless to others. So we really monitor our actions. And when we see the way our actions keep us in the vicious cycle, the catch-22, then it becomes, we become dissatisfied with our actions and are willing to let those go and cultivate instead actions of compassion, of kindness, of looking after ourselves and looking after others. All the way through this, because the Buddha presented the 8-step program not necessarily consecutively, but as 8 branches or 8 spokes, all the way through right mindfulness, which is numerically the 7th of the steps, is understood as guiding and participating in all of them. Now, the 5th practice is right livelihood. So one pays attention there to how one's livelihood, how the way one earns one's living is perpetuating the problem of dissatisfaction, craving, disappointment, back to suffering over and over again. So livelihood is the issue. So then one lets go of any livelihood that involves the taking of life or the hurting of life, the exploitation of others, or the hurting of self, the hurting of the body. And here again we see I think the connection with the problem of addiction, which involves the hurting of the body. The 6th practice is right effort or diligence. And so this involves a careful reflection on efforts and activities that must be avoided, those that must be overcome, those that need to be newly developed, and finally those that need to be maintained. So again, it becomes a thorough program of letting go of the old, of undoing, so that the inherent Buddha nature that we all have, and we just have to get out of the way so that it can take over, so that this can be maintained. The final practice is right concentration, which involves cultivating a mind that is living in the here and now, that is aware that everything is transient, we are transient, that the ego or the self is as transient as everything else, that the ego or the self that is trying to do the impossible, the controlling, is itself not a part of the answer. It's not building a stronger ego. That's the whole problem in itself. So it's a kind of letting go of that ego, and then really starting to experience that we've already got it all. See, this was the whole crux of the Buddha's experience and his subsequent message, that it's all there, it's all already there. And all we have to do is move out of the way, and that everything we've hitherto done to escape this is being what's maintaining it. So that the Buddha nature is part of it is not something special, it's just who we are, it's what we are. And so when that happens, we're able then to stop this kind of mad race of going forward, restlessly grasping, being disappointed, trying again, going back for what gave us satisfaction, what gave us transient peace, and so forth. So now, those are basically the core teachings of the Buddha, that we've already got it all, and that this 8-step program is a program of learning how, through practice, to let go. Buddhism talks, particularly in its religious domain, about the achievement of nirvana as being the goal, as though, and nirvana seems to be described as this ultimate mystical state where everything dissolves and you become one with reality. But it's a much more practical matter than that. Nirvana is simply that letting go all negativities, all negative thoughts, all negative actions, all negative language, all negative and destructive emotion eases off, and it's replaced by affirmation, confidence, the ability to just live from moment to moment and take on activities as they come. So the whole anticipation machine, which Daniel Dennett calls the human brain, always trying to plan ahead, control ahead, gear ourselves toward a happiness that inevitably disappoints, is no longer necessary. We live from moment to moment, and as challenges come up, we find our very nature is able to encompass these. Well, what's happening today in the fields of psychology and neuroscience is remarkably compatible with all of this. Now, let me just back up for a second and say that the goal of nirvana, really, that this 8-step program isn't so much a path, or isn't so much a path to get to a goal. It's the path itself. That the path itself is constantly a struggle. That it's not so much that suffering is never there, but that the path itself is the goal. The constant just going forward, being one with others. And one of the highest ideals in the whole Buddhist scheme of things, particularly in the Mahayana schools of Tibet, China, and Japan, says that it's not just one's own suffering that one becomes preoccupied with, or that one seeks to overcome. It's the suffering of all life, that it's a realization that rather than being locked in on ourselves, that we are that we're intrinsically connected to all life. And so wherever there is suffering, then I too suffer. So all my actions are no longer geared simply to cleaning up my own act, to fixing myself. It's a realization that that if I'm dealing with somebody else who's suffering, then I suffer their pain as well. My compassion makes me unhappy and so my activities are out of compassion to help alleviate the suffering of the other through acts of kindness, through acts of compassion, and that's a never-ending process. So one never really gets there. The Bodhisattva vow says that wherever there is suffering, and as long as there is suffering, may I return lifetime after lifetime until all suffering is vanquished from the earth. So the path is the goal is the path. Okay, in psychology and neuroscience in recent years, particularly since about the late 1980s, really got going in the 90s, and currently there's been remarkable movements that coincide here, and first of all, I'll deal with the issues in the cognitive sciences, and one of the things that's really been characteristic of life in the modern world, or the world since modernity first came upon us in the Western world, we've really been led by the discovery of René Descartes that his answer to his problem of suffering, his quest for certainty, and it led him to believe in the objectivity of the self and the objectivity of the world. And so it really reinforced that whole notion that we can control the world, we can control ourselves. The first break in that really came about with the teachings of Freud, that and Freud's contribution to all of this was that the desire is really the guiding force, and it's desire that invariably disappoints. But Freud's notion of the unconscious, as we know, was that it was a repository of all the garbage, all the frustrations that we had in this restless quest for satisfaction. Jung came along and offered a notion of the unconscious that's much more consistent with the Buddhist affirmation and the Buddhist experience, namely that the parts of ourselves that we're not aware of really are running the show, and that we can rely on them in some very fundamental ways to spontaneously guide us forward. Milton Erickson added a further dimension to this through his work with hypnosis, in which he used the unconscious and thought of the unconscious almost totally as a key to our resources for dealing with the challenges that life faces us. And he would elicit those resources and do an end run around the conscious determination to control things. Now, psychology kind of got itself off track in the years of behaviorism, where the whole notion of consciousness was just kind of disregarded, and everything could be done through kind of behaviorist principles. But in the 1970s, the cognitive revolution came along, realizing that consciousness played a very important role, and this is where things start to get interesting, in that cognitive therapy plugged right into that Buddhist notion to pay attention to what we're saying to ourselves, pay attention to the self-defeating thoughts that are really keeping the whole frustrating, unhappy process going. But a lot of the further aspects of the cognitive revolution really got going in a fascinating way with work by people like John Bargh and Daniel Wegner. And what they've done is a fascinating series of experiments. Bargh's work involved a lot of use of priming techniques, so that he would introduce subjects to, say, scrambled sentences and scrambled paragraphs, interspersed with which would be words to do with, in one fascinating experiment, the words that were interspersed in the word scrambling sentences had to do with characteristics of old age, slowness, slow physically, slow mentally, but interspersed in such a kind of way that the subject wouldn't be aware of what they're experiencing or what they're reading as having any point. And in the experiments, the subjects, when they finished, were then timed as to how long it took them to leave the room where the experiment was taking place and walk down the hall to the elevator. And the subjects that were primed with words to do with characteristics of old age took a significantly longer time to get to the elevator than the control group who had no such priming. In another series of those experiments, subjects were primed with words about politeness, and they'd just be kind of interspersed at random throughout these sentence unscrambling exercises. And so they had to do with politeness. The control group, of course, no such thing. And then what would happen was the subjects would leave the room, and one of the professor involved in the thing would be chatting away to a colleague, and those that had been primed on politeness waited their turn. Others had been primed on words using rudeness, and so the subjects using rudeness would interrupt the professor and his colleague a significantly higher percentage of time than those that were primed with words on politeness. Another one was where again they were primed on helpfulness, words scrambled involving helpfulness, and so they would get on the elevator, and a Confederate would drop a whole sheaf of papers and pens and pencils, and those that had been primed with words having to do with helpfulness would significantly more. They'd reach down and help the person, and those in the control group do no such thing. And then there was one other interesting aspect to it. In one group, the pens were all leaking and smudged with ink and so forth, and even those primed for helpfulness didn't. There was a limit to their helpfulness, which seemed to suggest that one's values already, they took precedent over the priming subject. But all of these priming experiments seem to indicate that we're driven not so much by conscious intentions as we are driven by what's already, the brain, the mind, is already running the show for us and self-organizing to bring about results that are in our own interest. The experiments of Daniel Wegner are, he's written a fascinating book called The Illusion of the Conscious Will, and he's done a whole raft of experiments which demonstrate pretty conclusively that before a person starts to do something and thinks and is convinced that they're willing it, the brain has already registered, has prepared itself for the action. There's a kind of readiness potential before the person is consciously aware of what they're going to do. So this whole raft of experiments by Barg and associates seem to indicate that the will, the effort to control, is itself an illusion in human life, and that the brain is already, and the mind brain is self-organizing and running the show in our own best interests, and so our conscious mind is, and our intentionality is getting in the way over and over again. Now he argues that that this is both a problem and an asset, in that intentionality and the notion of conscious will is part of what he calls an authorship emotion, that when we say we intended something or we willed something, it's because we're willing to own that. We're willing to take responsibility for that action. And so often when when something happens that we have no control over, then we don't claim that we willed that. We say, I couldn't help it, or we blame somebody else. So the whole notion of the conscious will is what we're willing to take responsibility for, and what we're willing to claim as part of a kind of an ongoing story. So he argues the whole value of paying attention to, not taking our conscious will too seriously, but paying attention to it as a kind of a theme that runs through our lives and lets us understand ourselves in terms of what we're willing to take responsibility for, and then to question what's going on when we're not so willing to take responsibility and we're more inclined to blame it on others. So that whole thing is a fellow named, yeah.
Well, this whole sort of vast aspect of this self-organizing
Yeah.
part, which obviously is, grouped into like how we were brought up, education, religion, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, so how does that? Is there this a constant war going on then? Indefinite?
Well, yeah, this is,
Life?
yeah,
Between our self-will, our intentions, conscious,
yeah.
and is this the subconscious mind?
Well,
Constantly, are we aware of it? Like, are we aware of it?
we're aware of it when there's discrepancies, and we're forever trying to kind of plug in those discrepancies and rationalize around them. But where this becomes interestingly compatible with Buddhist therapy is that, remember before in the teachings of the Buddha, everything depends on what we're feeding ourselves. The ruminations, the thinking, the words, the actions are all how we're feeding the brain, how we're feeding the mind-brain. And if we're feeding garbage, if we're feeding crap, if we're feeding negativity, if we're feeding destructive emotions, then that's what's going to be spontaneously guiding our actions and contributing to this catch-22 that we're perennially caught up with. So the Buddhist therapy, the Buddha therapy, if you like, is encouraging us to feed into ourselves positive thoughts, to pay attention to ourselves, pay attention how we're feeding ourselves with positive thoughts, positive feelings, and positive actions. So that actions that are leading to healing emotions, healing actions, healing livelihoods, so that the brain is constantly being fed, the mind brain is being fed positively and in a healing way. So then the mind brain is working on our behalf. Until then, it's kind of working against us, and the conscious mind is rationalizing, justifying, explaining, that kind of thing. Yeah, yeah.
There is kind of a parallel here with addiction to parallels.
Yeah.
A lot of people with addictions develop the addictive or dysfunctional side of themselves. Psychomatic often called abuse for the primitive side. And in recovery, like is that they learn to shrink the addict thinking and increase the recovery, pro-social, whatever they call it, good stuff.
Yeah.
So when you trust, what we tell people as counselors, trust your inner voice. Well, that's not good if your inner voice says don't drink.
Yeah.
But trust your inner voice is a good thing once they can differentiate voice one from voice two. So when they're able to recognize, go to a meeting, talk to the sponsor, meditate, pray, whatever, versus the voice that says call it to do it, then they can react a certain way.
Yeah, yeah.
So you kind of like put it in modern reductionist terms, when you reprogram yourself, you're talking about reprogramming the unconscious.
Yeah, yeah,
If you do good stuff, it will grow. If you do garbage, it will turn into smoke.
yeah,
So in recovery, if the addict feeds the recovery stuff, they'll have an unconscious recovery mind
yeah, yeah.
and an unconscious recovery voice. If they feed anger, resentment, thinking, they'll get more of that. That makes sense?
It's totally what it's all about, and that's really consistent with the idea that that this is a journey that doesn't really have an arrival point. It's just always there's always is the struggle, but hopefully the healing emotions, the healing actions, the healing thoughts, the healing livelihood is taking over more and more and running the show. So that the brain is indeed our ally, our friend, and we can relax more and let it run the show and kind of give up this illusion of the controlling self, the controlling ego. A fellow named Timothy Wilson has developed the idea of the adaptive unconscious, which is very much along these lines, that the adaptive unconscious is working for us to the extent that we're working for it, we're feeding it, we're looking after it. So if we look after the unconscious mind will look after us. If we screw around with the unconscious mind and inadvertently or unintentionally or ignorantly feed it resentments, self-justifying thoughts, negative thoughts, then it'll mess us up, at least to that extent. Wilson's answer then to this is to the cultivation of a healing story, of a story of recovery, of a story of moving forward, and that as we build on such a story, then that story then will feed back into the adaptive unconscious, and so the two will work in kind of a beautiful synchrony. Oh, very much so. In fact, I don't know if any of you, if you've read that book, a lot of the, was it that book that has all the priming research in it? I think it's either that one or what's the other one, Freakonomics. One or the other of those has a lot of this similar research from a similar point of view. But yeah, Blink is very much in this tradition and making use of a lot of this. The last area of the psychological revolution I want to talk with, and I guess we're running short of time, is the whole movement of positive psychology, and I won't spend a lot of time on that. We have one of the great positive psychologists of that movement ourselves in Paul Wong, but Martin Seligman is the one that really got this whole movement going. And he got really tired of psychology becoming more and more dominated by a kind of a pathologizing clinical psychology. And that he thought that psychology had done a wonderful job of understanding pathology. And he was part of that in his work on depression as learned helplessness. But he decided it was time to go beyond that and to build a whole psychology around positive emotions, positive actions, cultivation of virtues, and cultivation virtues understood as strengths. And so he has a list of the strengths, and some of his books have quite wonderful little exercises so that one can find out what one's own strengths are, and gives guidance as to how to cultivate these. It's very much compatible with Buddhist psychology, which is thoroughly the same thing, the cultivation of the positive and the moving away from the focus on the pathologizing. hand in hand with Seligman's work is a recent book that's just come out called Stumbling on Happiness. It's really quite a delightful book, which with a lot of humor emphasizes all the ways that we, Daniel Gilbert is the author of that one, Stumbling on Happiness, all the ways we thwart our own efforts to our quest for happiness by setting up goals for ourselves in the future, or intentions in the future. And the future's, again, consistent with Buddhist therapy. The future's always different than we think it's going to be. And so when we get there, it invariably disappoints us. So we have to set another set of goals to aim for future happiness. So we're saying that if I only ever won the lottery, then I would be happy. Of course, there's just tons of evidence that practically anything that we set as a goal that will then make us happy disappoints. And so he suggests that because this is the case, he has a kind of a modest suggestion to end his book, that if we are focusing on the future and we want to know what will make us happy, our own imaginations invariably get it wrong. We're invariably looking for happiness in all the wrong places. The best thing to do is just ask somebody else. If being rich is what we think will make us happy, and we put all our energy into being rich or being successful, and then when we get there, we find we're disappointed. Best thing to do is ask somebody who's rich, ask somebody who's successful, ask somebody who's powerful, are they happy? And let that be our guide. So it's a kind of a modest proposal to end.
Harkens to Franco as well.
What's that?
That harkens to Franco, that you cannot achieve happiness by aiming at it.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
have to aim at something meaningful, and then happiness ensues. It cannot be pursued. It must ensue.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And Shakespeare even had something on that. I can't remember the exact quote or where to find it in the moment, but it's something to do, what's done is won, and it's in the striving that we really find inadvertently or are surprised by happiness. Let me see. Let me do the invariable rushing that ends these things. We have to talk briefly about Csikszentmihalyi, the guy with the whole idea of flow, where it's not so much striving for something in the future wherein we find happiness. It's in participating in an activity with such thoroughness, with such involvement, so that we lose the sense of time, we lose the sense of even of self. I mean, we have heightened awareness, but the whole sort of sense of self-consciousness, of striving, of maybe I won't make it, just gets set aside as we immerse ourselves in the whole concept of flow. And the concept of flow has been further amplified by a student of Csikszentmihalyi named Gene Nakamura, who's developed the idea of vital engagement. Same thing, you're just vitally there in what you're doing. Again, very consistent with Buddhist therapy as I'm describing it. Let's just quickly sweep through the exciting neuroscience findings. Perhaps many of us are aware of the work of Jon Kabat-Zinn, who isn't a psychologist and he's not a neuroscientist, but in his development of the whole idea of mindfulness-based stress reduction, he has introduced, I guess by now, tens of thousands of people to the benefits of meditation practice in dealing with various kinds of stress, hypertension, dealing with the added-on suffering that goes with cancer, with arthritis, with Parkinson's disease, just any number of ailments that aren't necessarily, it would be insulting to say, oh, they're stress-related, but stress accompanies them, and the use of meditation has been hugely demonstrated in his work. He's also combined with really one of the really exciting people in the field, Richard Davidson, who's a neuroscientist who's done tons of work on neuroplasticity. And Davidson's famous for his work with the Tibetan monk Matthieu Ricard and other Tibetan practitioners. Ricard is a microbiologist, Ph.D. microbiologist who went to India about 30 years ago and became, one thing led to another, became a Buddhist monk in the Tibetan tradition. At any rate, Richardson's work has shown that the brain, the prefrontal cortex of the brain in the right hemisphere processes happy, positive emotions, and in the left hemisphere processes emotions involving distress. And he's found that meditation practice brings about a very significant shift in the direction of right prefrontal activity in the happiness realm, and so that it actually leads to changes in the structure and functioning of the brain. And in his work with Matthieu Ricard, he found that he could ask Ricard to meditate on particular subjects of a positive nature, of a happy nature, and the measures for Ricard were just right off the chart. So that after years of meditating, his brain he was able to pretty much guide what emotions he would live by, and the happiness emotions just kind of ran the show. Another big fellow in the neuroscience area is a fellow named Francisco Varela, who really started a lot of this. He was a neuroscientist who worked with Humberto Maturana in Chile in the early 70s and developed a lot of key ideas in Maturana's thinking. Maturana and Varela, they were kind of a team, but then when the Chilean when the Allende regime was overthrown by the CIA and right-wing coup, Varela, who was then a committed Marxist, fled first to Cuba, and then managed to somehow come to the United States, even though he's a committed Marxist in the mid-70s, and came under the influence of Chogyam Trungpa at Boulder, where he was teaching, and so became quite an active Buddhist and a very dear friend of the Dalai Lama. Now, he developed the idea that, and really focused on the idea that many of the people working in the cognitive sciences were pretty much ignoring consciousness and focusing on the whole idea that the brain just ran the show and consciousness played no role at all. And so he suggested that meditators were a tremendous resource for helping us to understand the role of consciousness and how consciousness did play a role in influencing the spontaneous activity of the brain. And I think the final area that I really want to emphasize is the discovery in recent years of mirror neurons. And this happened initially in the late 80s, it was quite accidentally discovered that when two monkeys, macaque monkeys, were facing each other, when one started feeding himself, the particular neurons in the brain started firing. And in the monkey that was observing, the precise same neurons in the brain fired. So that one thing led to another, and there was a discovery that in primates, at least, all primates, including and especially humans, there's this whole phenomenon of mirror neurons, such that that in any kind of interaction with each other, when one initiates an action, the exact same neurons in the observer or the other participant fire. So it suggests a fellow named Vittorio. This was discovered by a group of Italian researchers, and a fellow named Vittorio Galeza has done a lot of work on the implications of mirror neurons, and he calls it the root of empathy, and suggests that here we have it, that intrinsic in the brain is an imitative quality and a compassionate quality, that when one person does one thing, there's an intrinsic capacity, an inclination to do the same, and also to feel the same. So that all of this seems to come together to suggest that the whole Buddhist notion of the Buddha mind is remarkably and wonderfully compatible with the emerging cognitive and neuroscience notions that the brain is self-organizing, and that when it's fed positively and nurtured well, it works for us. And so the whole illusion of the conscious ego, the conscious self, the conscious will, which drives the addicted person, and is the core of the addicted person's relentless catch-22, can be abandoned. That there is really no need for, and not only no need, but no possibility of the conscious will, the conscious ego, getting us anywhere, but that when we let go and nurture ourselves with positive thoughts, feelings, actions, and livelihood, that the brain works for us, and that we can simply live our lives in that kind of flow, because each one of us in that sense is a Buddha, and all we have to do is cultivate what's already there, to learn how to stop doing, undo the negativity, and let the positivity take over and run our lives. And so that each one of us is a Buddha, and all we have to do is nurture that quality and go forth to relieve the suffering of the world. Yes, yes. What was that again? What's what? Oh. What are the criteria for? Oh, well, the positive is feeding. Yeah, but the key element in the positive is compassion. It's compassion for oneself, compassion for the other, and to act according to.
My drunk body also feels great. We are drunk, we drink together. Everything is fine. For him is fine, for me is fine. We share our positive emotions together, drinking together, taking heroin together. It's great for both of us. How to differentiate what is a positive and negative in this context?
Well, once you start hanging on to the positive and acting like I've got to have that and I've got to keep that, I've got the answer, here I am, this is all I have to do, then the positive comes and it goes. And so to realize that when good experiences come, yes, they will fade too, but other positive experiences will come along as well. Other opportunities for kindness, opportunities for sociability, opportunities for friendship will come. So we don't have to hang on to anything. That's the hanging on, the clinging that causes the problems.
Your idea was we need to open ourselves for positive emotions
Yeah,
and get rid of negative.
to let the negative go, yeah.
Yes, but I'm asking again, it's not absolute what is a positive, what is a negative. I guess from Buddhist point of view, we need just to get rid of any emotions.
No.
Any emotions.
No.
There's no attachment for them.
Well, yeah, no attachment to them, no clinging to them, because one doesn't have to cling to them. One doesn't have to say, oh, I'm happy, I've got it all. Now just don't let this be disturbed, because all emotions, the very nature of emotions is they come and they go. And if we live our lives being thankful for experiences of happiness, experiences of accomplishment, experiences of affiliation, experiences of delight, then what's that phrase of Blake's? Anyway, to do with he that sees the bird flying and grabs it loses it, but he that lets the winged bird fly lives in eternity sunrise, I think it is. So it's just continue living in a process of letting it go, because it's in our nature that the happy, the delightful, the joyful, the compassionate feelings will come, they will go, and they'll come back and they'll go, and so forth. Yeah.
First of all, I would like to honor the process of what your enterprise, because there's a lot of work to try to combine the Western discoveries and experiment, combine that with Eastern philosophies, and it's really a really good process. And what I see as a concern in that Eightfold process would be that I think that we need, as a concern, to be more present with the client compared to the 12-step process, which can be done more individually or within a group counseling. For that specific Eightfold steps, I would see the role of the counselor as being more important, and I think that's one of the ways that we can achieve help a client reinterpret their lives. Would be to use postmodern approaches.
Oh, yeah.
And narrative therapy could be a good approach to try to help the client to reinterpret their own view of themselves into a more positive.
For myself, I've thought that my reputation in the field of family therapy is as a narrative therapist, and what has occurred to me is that a really beautiful way of using narrative therapy would be to prescribe meditation for the client with a focus on who do I think I am, who do you think you are, and let that be the guiding feature of the meditation. And then the therapy sessions would be then to bring the story forth. One of the other people I didn't discuss was a fellow named Daniel Siegel, who's a child psychiatrist. He's written a wonderful book called The Developing Mind. And he's found that when people can, with parents, like he weds neuroscience with attachment theory, and he's found that when parents can, when they're asked to tell the story of their childhood, if they can tell a pretty complete story, that their likelihood that their parenting and their children will develop in a very nicely attached way are very high. So this is quite remarkable. So it suggests that the goal then of a narrative therapy would be to help people tell their complete story like most people when they come into therapy, I mean, all therapy in a way, all talk therapy is narrative, because we basically talk about ourselves and we talk about our relationship, and we do it in a kind of a narrative way. And the problem is when people come in to do therapy, they do it, their story is basically tends to be a sad tale, a tale of frustration, of incompletion, of fragmentation. And the whole goal of the therapy is to tell the rest of the story, to tell the whole story. And as the whole story gets told, it seems to fulfill this process of enabling oneself, the conscious part of the mind, to feed the unconscious, so that the two work in this kind of synchrony. So that quite remarkable things can be achieved simply apparently, by telling the whole story. And the whole story allows us to forgive ourselves, to particularly have compassion for ourselves. Because in the Buddhist notion of compassion, sometimes it's all too easy to forget the self, but the self is a suffering being too. And so one always has to include oneself in those whom one feels compassion for. So, thank you all very much.